Hi, I just going to try and make a short video this time about the choices facing us if the government passes this 4-year plan and starts off with the budget in December. This, uh, which will include doing an awful lot of things that the IMF wants us to do. And they're going to use guilt and fear to try panic us again into approving this by telling us that the world will fall in just like it would have if we don't do what they say. And these are the people who've been lying to us, and they expect us to fall for it just because they try to scare us, um, while they keep the information from us about what's going on, which is how they've led us from A to B down the garden path, carefully masking what they're doing. Meanwhile, they borrow more and more in the name of the country to help out private speculators. Um, and let's be clear that this money that we owe, or that they say we owe, is borrowed by our government to bail out banks who they weren't just unlucky. I worked in investment banking from around 1995 to 2001. I've worked in investment banks in Dublin, Luxembourg, the United Kingdom, and in Australia. And I can tell you that there are an awful lot of rules in banking, especially when you're dealing with the type of huge numbers that we're talking about here. Those rules are there for a reason, to protect the economy, to protect the bank itself, and to protect all the shareholders in the bank. But when a bunch of people get together and decide to bend those rules because they can think that they make more and more money, what you have basically is a criminal scam, which has to be kept up by lying to the people as long as you can that everything's going to turn out okay, uh, as things actually get worse and worse. But uh, somebody walks away with the profits, and somebody else is left holding the can. In this case, it's supposed to be us, even though the regulator's office not doing the inspections they could. The law has been broken by the banks, and the banks that lend in the banks in Europe that were lending money to our banks also breaking the law. But those are big countries; they have clout. We have a spineless government in a small country that we haven't been watching, so we haven't been cracking the whip. So it's being passed down to who they think is the weakest. And this is a hell of a lot of money. It's big numbers. But let's not forget, another big number is 4 million, which is how many of us there are. And uh, if we get our act together and move together, that's an effective number. Because while they say that the IMF agreement is an optional one, it's just something that they have in reserve. True to form, um, that's a complete and utter lie. And the small amount of people who believe it because they trust Fianna Fáil or because they're too scared to consider what it means that they're lying, uh, seem to not realise that we already borrowed a huge amount of money. We're in debt to more than the actual GNP of the country. Uh, and mostly because we were borrowing on the bond market to keep the zombie banks alive. Now, the bond market is basically sick of us. We borrowed so much money uh, that we are only funded until around the spring of summer next year. At which point, if we want to keep propping up the banks and have public services, we can't afford both of them on our economy, and the banks are just this huge millstone around our neck. But if we still have in place a government stupid enough or treasonous enough to do that, then we're going to have to go to the IMF. And the IMF would be charging us a hell of a lot of money, lending a lot of money and charging us a hell of a lot of interest. And the repayments annually will be so high that it's going to be more than the budget of the Department of Health, which is a savage amount of money. And when that isn't enough, because the very fact of paying back that much money, taking it out of the economy, is going to make our economy even worse and weaker, apart from the other stupid things that are included in it, that they the IMF will do what it has done in South America, what it did in Latvia, what it tried to do in Poland, is basically asset strip the country. Now, if you haven't read up on what the IMF is doing, don't trust what the government tells you, but research it yourself. They would do things like they did in Bolivia, where they privatized the water, and people woke up one day to find that the water out of the tap isn't free anymore. It had been sold off. The entire water system had been basically given under contract to a company called Bechtel. And you come across cases where like hospitals, schools get closed down, entire systems get privatized. They're talking, imagine just all the dual carriageways and motorways tolled, all of them. The railways broken up and sold off for half nothing to some multinational company, probably one of the same companies that lent us the money and caused the crisis in the same place. That's the type of thing that's happening. What's left after it, once they've reduced wages for everybody, cut all the social protection networks that people rely on in a recession, and the public sector that a lot of people work in, it'll be more like a third world country. We could be talking about having wages similar to Poland, and yet costs of living, including those of us who still have massive mortgages, at recent rates. So it will basically be turned into a third world country. And for people who think that we have to go along with this budget, we have no choice, we have to be responsible, blah blah blah, all the other lies that they will try to guilt trip us or panic us into doing it, and yet somehow hoping that whatever our particular issue is, that is saved. That, for example, they'll have to pass this budget, but I hope they don't touch the minimum wage. They have to pass the budget, but I hope they don't touch resource teachers, or I hope they don't touch respite centres, or I hope they don't touch, all the various disability services. That's like accepting a hangman's noose around your neck and trying to negotiate that your hand or your foot is saved. If you let them put that rope around your neck, there's no point asking for this or that to be saved. The only chance that we have of maintaining anything resembling democracy and like a dignified standard of living in this country, not ending up like some third world basket case, is to fight against the very passing of this budget, to not let it happen, to not have our entire economy geared towards sorting out a bunch of speculators rather than providing for an economy of jobs and services for 4 million people. The government is already fairly shaky, and I think if we keep up the pressure and get more and more intense as budget day looms, we can cause a few to go. We don't have to cause a lot more to go out of the government for them to lose majority. And we should definitely send up some warning shots to Fine Gael and Labour that we won't accept it, because without a big threat hanging over them of public anger, they also are weak and spineless enough to go along with anything the EU dictates at the IMF and the European Central Bank, the people who don't want their countries to bail out the euro but would prefer that we do it. Now, we already have had a number of TDs saying they won't support it. The Green Party are kind of half in, half out. If we keep up the pressure, keep emailing them, email all of them, contact your local ones, and just organise and get together. I mean, we could be looking at strikes, we could be looking at boycotts, whatever it takes, non-violent resistance to this. But the options are basically to have a decent standard of living. It won't be the Celtic Tiger, but it's what we can live with, or to end up a third world basket case just off the coast of Europe. So that's what we're facing, and that's what we have to be brave about. And I hope we can all encourage others to join in.